Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the tangled knots of the world's most fascinating stories, research, and technical documents and unravel them into pure, distilled insight.
And today we have something really special. It's a rich, almost novelistic account that plunges us into the life of an engineer, a guy named Dan Davis.
His story is just this perfect storm of corporate espionage, advanced speculation and automation, and a desperate, decades-long gamble involving cold sleep and even temporal displacement.
It really is an extraordinary personal journey, and it's set against this backdrop of massive technological and sociological change, from the 1970s all the way up to the turn of the millennium.
So Dan Davis is forced to navigate betrayal, poverty, and scientific concepts that really border on magic, all in this pursuit of justice.
Yeah, and for us, this is a phenomenal opportunity. We can look beneath the plot and ask some really critical questions.
Like, what does it actually take to invent truly disruptive technology?
And what happens when a pure engineering philosophy, a desire to make things better, collides with just pure corporate greed?
And my favorite part, how do the mechanics of a truly dysfunctional time machine actually work?
I mean, that's the good stuff, right?
Exactly. So our mission today is to extract those core insights. We're going to map out Dan's unique engineering philosophy, and we'll get into the fascinating specifics of his automation concepts, especially those memory circuits.
We're also going to analyze the bizarre economic realities of the future he wakes up in.
And we absolutely have to deeply explore the flawed, honestly terrifying physics of that temporal displacement system.
And through it all, we're anchored by this wonderful, consistent metaphor woven through Dan's life. This desperate search for the door into summer.
It's not just about a better future, is it? It's about finding a secure, stable reality.
A reality sought not only by Dan, but also by his incredibly discerning Tomcat, Petronius the Arbiter, or Pete.
Who believes his human is entirely to blame for the cold weather.
As one does.
So let's begin with Dan Davis, the engineer, the narrator. His entire life philosophy, it's deeply rooted in self-reliance and personal liberty. And this isn't just some abstract thought for him. It's a profound, emotional response to trauma.
That's the foundation of his whole drive, isn't it? His father, Daniel Boone Davis, was intentionally named as this statement against the conformity of the mass man.
Right.
But tragically, the elder Davis died under brainwashing while he was a prisoner during the Korean War.
And that experience just left Dan with his overwhelming impulse to avoid authority, to be his own master.
Completely. He served his hitch as a sergeant technician, but that was just to get the skills and the GI benefits. His core objective was always to be self-employed. No orders taken, no orders given.
And that desire for autonomy is instantly visible in the physical setting of his early life, just before 6 Weeks' War around 1970.
Oh yeah, that old rambling Connecticut farmhouse.
Exactly.
It's the perfect physical manifestation of his desire to escape control. The house had 11 doors to the outside.
And then, of course, the 12th door.
Pete's custom entrance, and this wasn't some flimsy cat flap. It was a board fitted into a window with what he called a cat strainer, carefully measured to be just wide enough for Pete's whiskers. It just underscores Dan's dedication to precise engineering, even for, domestic absurdities.
And it's those absurdities that really reveal his particular brand of engineering obsession. He actually sat down and quantified the futility of human-feline cohabitation.
Yes. Dan calculated with a characteristic engineer specificity that since the dawn of civilization, 978 man-centuries have been wasted purely on the task of opening doors for cats.
It's a hilarious detail, but it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It does. It shows Dan is driven by this desire to eliminate inefficiency and drudgery, whether it's in guided missiles or just daily chores. His brain is just wired to optimize everything.
And this brings us to Pete, who views Dan's relationship to the world, and indeed the cosmos, in equally specific yet profoundly flawed terms.
Pete is the philosophical anchor of the whole thing.
It really is.
His fixed conviction is that Dan is responsible for only three things: quarters, rations, and weather.
And since Connecticut winters were miserable,
Pete held the absolute, unwavering belief that one of those 12 available portals must lead into summer. It's just a matter of finding the right one.
which gives us that persistent, almost heartbreaking winter ritual.
Exactly. Every winter, Pete would badger Dan to check every single door, one by one, going through the entire house, only to be met with snow or slush, or freezing rain outside each one.
The disappointment was always absolute.
But the faith was unshakable. That search for the mythical door into summer is basically what Dan is doing emotionally for the rest of his life.
And the trauma of the 6 Weeks War really accelerates this pursuit.
Yeah, it destroyed Sandia where he was stationed, and tragically it cost him his family. But his GI benefits provided the capital for his next step.
So he and his friend, Miles Gentry, they start a factory in the Mojave Desert.
Built out of Air Force surplus, no less. This is the critical transition point. The Mojave factory is this blend of military precision being applied to domestic problems, and it's where Dan's genius finds its first real outlet.
And Miles provided the legal and financial framework.
While Dan provided the revolutionary ideas that were necessary to launch them from total obscurity.
Okay, so let's delve into the core of Dan's engineering philosophy here, because it's surprisingly targeted. He wasn't aiming for, like, generalized AI or space travel.
No, not at all. He was focused very narrowly on the domestic sphere. He was convinced that housewives were reactionaries who just wanted a better upholstered cave.
He saw the challenge very clearly.
Yeah, the rise of industrialized society had created this major gap he called the servant problem. Domestic servants were extinct, but the need for all that repetitive drudgery to be handled was still there.
So Dan didn't want to modernize the house itself. He wanted to revolutionize the labor within it.
And he called this the Second Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the housewife from the endless cycle of housekeeping.
And that focused philosophy gave rise to his first commercial blockbuster, The Hired Girl, Mark I.
The Mark I was revolutionary precisely because it was so simple and autonomous. Functionally, it was a self-propelled, continuous floor cleaner.
Sweeping, mopping, vacuuming, polishing.
Right, based on specific internal tapes you'd load into it. It just did its job relentlessly, collecting everything larger than a BB shot in a tray for the human to come and dispose of later.
This was true. Set it and forget it housekeeping.
It was.
So what were the technical secrets that allowed this level of autonomy in the early 1970s?
Two critical pieces of borrowed technology. First, the basic movement logic, the non-repeating prowl pattern.
The thing that let it cover every square inch of the floor without getting stuck or missing big areas.
Exactly. Dan swiped that algorithm from the designs for something called electric turtles, which was this early cybernetic idea published in Scientific American way back in the late 1940s.
So it was a known, effective pattern, just cleverly repurposed.
It was. But the true genius, the real secret sauce, was the memory circuit. That's what allowed it to work unsupervised without constantly needing input.
And that's the second and most legally dubious component.
Oh, definitely. The critical memory circuit was lifted directly from a guided missile system Dan had worked on while he was in the service.
Because it was part of a top-secret military project.
The concept itself was unpatented and therefore legally exploitable, and this memory component allowed the Mark I to store and execute these complex, cyclical tasks automatically, turning what was basically a motorized vacuum into a truly autonomous servant.
The economic trajectory is just as insightful as the technology itself. We see a perfect example of how disruptive tech shifts costs exponentially.
Absolutely. Dan records the precise costs of the pilot model. $4,317.09.
Which is a lot of money for a prototype back then.
A fortune. That's custom parts, labor, research. But once he engineered the product for mass production using standard parts he ordered straight out of Sweet's catalog, the unit cost just plummeted.
The first 100 units cost them just $39 a piece to manufacture.
$39. And they sold them for $85 retail at a discount house. They were practically giving away sophisticated automation.
Yeah.
The initial market reception was slow, though. They had to sell them on consignment at first.
But then Life magazine ran that 2-page spread.
And it became an overnight necessity. The company went from scrambling for cash to scrambling for personnel just to assemble the units.
It just illustrates that for true market disruption, it isn't enough to invent. You have to engineer the cost out of the product through smart production planning.
Precisely.
And that success led directly to the follow-up, Window Willie.
An electrostatic device designed to make dirt just spun right off polished silica.
So windows, bathtubs, toilet bowls.
Yeah, a simpler gadget, but one that introduced the philosophy that would ultimately cause the first real crack in the partnership.
Right, because Window Willie was defined by Dan's insistence on the plug-in component principle.
And Dan viewed conventional appliance repair as a form of consumer abuse. When a complex household gadget failed, it led to owner ulcers and required an expensive expert repairman.
Usually on a Saturday night.
Of course. who then had to diagnose this tiny fault within a complex proprietary mechanism. It was a nightmare.
So Dan's philosophy, which he adapted from military fail-safe research, was radical for the time. Don't repair, replace.
Exactly. If the sensor unit failed, the owner just bought a $5 replacement part and plugged it in, tossing the old one. This prevented customer frustration and protected the brand's reputation for reliability.
But this philosophy directly clashed with Miles Gentry's business model.
Oh, completely. Miles saw repair contracts, proprietary parts, and expert service calls as a major ongoing revenue stream. He was all about that recurring income.
So he was prioritizing short-term profit and planned obsolescence over long-term customer goodwill and engineered efficiency.
That's it in a nutshell. Miles argued the decision was purely business. He wanted to rush Willie to market as soon as the basic function worked.
And Dan fought him tooth and nail.
He insisted that the final decision to integrate plug-in modularity was an engineering decision, necessary to prevent the product from becoming another sickly, half-engineered gadget prone to what he called acute appendicitis.
And this clash over the philosophy of service and reliability, it just reveals this fundamental disconnect between the two men.
It was the beginning of the end, really.
This brings us to Dan's ultimate vision, the culmination of his philosophy, Flexible Frank. This was his magnum opus, the general-purpose household automaton.
Frank was meant to be the true Second Emancipation Proclamation, and he wanted it to cost roughly the price of a good automobile.
Since Dan was running this as a one-man R&D project, he had to be pretty resourceful.
He was. The design itself was physically unconventional. Built on a powered wheelchair chassis, it looked like a hat rack making love to an octopus.
I love that description.
It's great, isn't it? The components were sourced from all over. Delicate, high-feedback hands from atomics engineering suppliers, and eyes that were actually simpler than the monitoring systems used for reactor plant shielding.
But the heart of Frank, the real innovation, was the brain solution, the perfected application of the Thorson memory tubes.
The Thorson tubes are the most important technical detail in this entire deep dive. They were originally used in intercontinental ballistic missiles for incredibly precise navigational and trajectory control.
And they worked by recording the precise fluctuations in current required to perform a task manually.
Exactly. So if Dan manually guided Flexible Frank through the delicate process of clearing a table, lifting a dish, scraping waste, stacking it, placing it in the washer, the tube would record that exact pattern of movements, pressures, and timing.
It's basically muscle memory, but for a machine.
A perfect analogy. The tube recorded the current flow required. Once that tube was installed in Frank's square head, that machine could repeat the operation automatically, handling any dirty dishes without breaking one, just replicating the manual dexterity it had been taught.
But the world isn't a clean, repetitive loop, right?
Mm.
Dishes come in different sizes. The environment changes. How did Dan engineer for that kind of variability?
He added judgment circuits. Now, these weren't artificial intelligence in the modern sense. Dan called them hunting circuits.
Okay.
They were side circuits programmed to constantly monitor for specific limits or conditions. So if Frank was in the middle of a memorized operation and the pressure feedback from the hand reached a threshold that indicated, say, a plate slipping.
So the cycle didn't match the original memory.
Right. The judgment circuit would interrupt the basic instruction, force a check, and then attempt to self-correct within certain program tolerances.
This allows the machine to possess what looks like judgment, the ability to adapt or stop before a mistake is made, but it's actually just extremely advanced, pre-programmed limit logic.
Precisely, and Frank's head could hold 100 such memorized tubes, making him truly general purpose. He wasn't a specialized dishwasher or a floor cleaner. He was a universal domestic technician.
And the planned sales demonstration, teaching Frank to miss playing ping pong using a random choice circuit.
That was the ultimate proof of his flexibility. If you can engineer a perfect machine, the only way to prove its humanity is to teach it imperfection.
The moment Flexible Frank became a viable prototype, that's when all that ambitious creativity ran headlong into Miles Gentry's growing impatience and greed.
It really confirmed the friction we saw earlier over Window Willie.
Miles, he was seduced by the scale of this company, Annex Enterprises, and proposed selling Hired Girl, Inc. outright. He wanted to be a salaried executive in a big business.
And Dan's counter-proposal just reviews his integrity, I think. He suggested scaling back to a pure research corporation funded entirely by licensing royalties from their current patents.
He wanted financial independence so he could focus purely on invention, free from the daily grind of production and sales. This was his version of the door into summer.
It was. And this demand for pure independence is what triggered the immediate coup d'etat, executed by Miles and Dane's fiancée, Belle Darkin.
The corporate betrayal was just swift and brutal.
Unbelievably so. Belle immediately broke their engagement. When Dan returned to the plant to retrieve Flexible Frank, he found new padlocks on the gate.
And he was met by Joe Todd, a special armed guard.
And the specific threat was chilling. Todd was carrying soft-nosed bullets and was instructed to shoot Dan in the belly. The goal was to stop him immediately, not just wound him.
The swindle itself was meticulous. Dan was presented with a certified check and papers, including patent assignments he'd never formally executed for Hired Girl and Window Willie, and a stock transfer.
And crucially, his stock wasn't transferred to Miles, it was transferred to Belle, cited as compensation for services to the company beyond her duties.
Dan, who had been drinking heavily in his devastation, sobered up instantly.
Right. He realized the documents were forged or manipulated, designed to steal his intellectual property by laundering it through his former fiancée.
And that confluence of corporate theft and personal betrayal, the realization of winter in his heart, pushed him to the radical decision to use cold sleep.
His initial motivation, it wasn't self-preservation or profit. It was just pure cold revenge. He wanted to sleep long enough for Miles and Belle to be dead, maybe 75 to 100 years.
But that initial overwhelming rage settled into something else.
A more gently fiendish idea, fueled by scotch, as he put it. The ultimate revenge on Belle specifically would be to be young when she was old.
So he adjusted his target to about 30 years. Just enough time to return and witness her physical decay while he remained youthful and vibrant.
It's dark, but you get it.
Totally. This leads to the critical economic calculus of cold sleep. To ensure his assets survived inflation and compound interest over 30 years, he couldn't choose conservative investments like government bonds.
No, he needed high-risk, high-return ventures. He deliberately hung on to the hired girl stock, betting on the long-term success of the automation industry, even if Miles and Belle were running it.
He also made a surprisingly prescient choice. He invested cash in a San Francisco fertilizer firm.
Yeah, one that was experimenting with edible algae and yeasts. And this wasn't a whim. Dan was anticipating significant future population growth and the inevitable demand for cheap, high-protein food surrogates.
It just demonstrates his foresight, which contrasts so sharply with Miles's short-term thinking.
And he also chose the most morbidly lucrative insurance option available.
The Russian roulette option.
This is the cold calculus of the insurance business, the breakage to the house. If Dan died in hibernation, his assets went entirely into the mutual assurance company's trust fund.
But by choosing this, he became an heir to everyone else who chose the same option and did die.
Exactly. It was legalized gambling with incredibly high stakes, guaranteeing the highest possible return if he survived. The agent, a Mr. Powell, was ecstatic because it maximized the house's potential breakage.
But the whole cold sleep plan couldn't proceed until he addressed the one philosophical obstacle he had left.
His commitment to Pete.
He had a moral contract with his super spoiled cat. Yeah.
So he asked the mutual assurance agent if Pete could join him. The agent was initially resistant, but he quickly reversed course when Dan reminded him of the deep history of cryogenics.
The first successful experiments were on cats.
Right, and an unaged cat was reportedly alive in deep hypothermia vaults at the Naval Research Laboratory, having survived for decades.
This detail is fascinating. It suggests that decades before humans were commercially attempting cold sleep, the technology had been proven viable on felines.
And Pete's acceptance at 15% of the human fee just confirms the viability and history of the process.
But before the contract is finalized, Dan decides to confront Miles and Belle one last time, which sets up the dramatic climax of the betrayal.
He pushes his luck. He turns his back on Belle, and she swiftly injects him with the zombie drug.
This drug was an illegal psychoanalysis tool. Basically Uncle Sam's answer to brainwashing.
And its effect was total, frightening passivity. Dan was conscious. He could see and hear, but he had no feeling, no interest, no will.
Bill planned to program him under this state, to forget the entire incident, never sue, and just proceed meekly with the cold sleep.
The plan hinged on Dan's passivity, but Belle forgot the X factor.
Cotronius the Arbiter.
Pete, sensing this ultimate, unresolvable distress in his human caretaker, reacted violently. He begins to wail, a sound Dan recognizes as signaling ultimate distress beyond a cat's capacity to resolve.
Miles tries to subdue the cat, leading to this catastrophic, chaotic, off-screen battle.
All we hear are the results. Crashes, shouts, curses, Belle screams. Pete, touchy and skilled with his weapons, just defeats both of them.
And in their panic, Miles and Bell are forced to lock Pete outside the house.
This unintentional act, saving the cat from the sleep chamber, ultimately saves Dan from Bell's hypnotic programming, because the struggle forces them to rush Dan to the consolidated sanctuary at Sawtell before the programming is complete.
So Dan wakes up, precisely 30 years later, on December 3rd, 2000. Physically, he's perfect.
But the sharp emotional edge of the betrayal has dulled. He notes the feeling is distant, like a ghost on a long-shot television screen. He is now a ghost, starting his quest again in a totally unrecognizable future.
And the societal and linguistic shifts are profound and immediate.
The sources spend a lot of time detailing this future world where technological integration has dramatically altered daily life.
For example, movies are now grabbies, which require seatbelts. This isn't just a quirky detail, right? It implies a true sensory overload.
It implies the perfection of nulling effects, likely derived from the same null-grav research that eventually birthed time travel. The sensory immersion is so total and the perceived motion so violent that physical restraint is just mandatory.
Culturally, he notices huge shifts too. England is now a province of Canada.
Which is a fun detail. And gold, which was his only long-term asset, is cheap and no longer a basis for money. It was abandoned after the Panic of '87.
And the language is a maze of new slang he has to navigate. He hears terms like barracking, kink, and the word host has completely changed meaning.
These linguistic shifts give us insight into the changed social norms. The term barracking is now a crime, essentially aggressive vagrancy or loitering.
Which suggests a society that's intolerant of public idleness, maybe because of the hyper-efficiency provided by automation.
Probably. And the fact that the word kink became offensive indicates a shift towards either extreme Puritanism or maybe hypersensitivity in social discourse.
His wardrobe is equally alienating. He's got cerise trousers with bell bottoms secured by stick-tight, pressure-sensitive closures.
The stick-tight closures are key. They're axially polarized, meaning they function perfectly once you understand their orientation, but they are utterly counterintuitive to someone used to zippers or buttons.
It's a small, daily frustration that just symbolizes his complete technological and cultural obsolescence.
It does.
Dan's first encounter with the successor to his genius is Eager Beaver, the orderly at the sanctuary.
And he immediately recognizes it as the great-grandson of Flexible Frank.
This has to be a moment of both professional pride and profound theft.
Absolutely. Eager Beaver is sleek, it uses voice-coded commands, something Dan couldn't afford or miniaturize back in 1970, but the core technology is his.
It still runs on Thorson tubes.
Exactly. He sees the unit lists over 40 patents, the earliest dated in 1970, which confirms his original stolen intellectual property was the foundation of this entire successful current automation line.
So, intellectually, Dan is vindicated, but financially, he's ruined.
The bankruptcy details are crucial. Master Insurance Company, a division of Mannix Enterprises, the conglomerate Miles and Bell were trying to sell out to handle this trust.
But that insurance company went bankrupt in a massive scandal.
Which means Dan's investments, those high-risk, high-return gambles, were completely wiped out. He's broke. He gets a $400 loan from the sanctuary, canceled against his unused recuperation time, and that's it.
This forces the obsolete engineer to seek work. And the minimum job he finds is incredibly revealing about the economy of the year 2000.
It really is. He's standing guard while industrial robots crush brand new, expensive Tobo buggies, Cadillacs, Lincolns for scrap iron.
This scene provides the deepest economic insight of this future world.
The shift boss explains that this destruction isn't simple waste, it's a price support strategy. The automated manufacturing base is so efficient it produces a massive surplus of luxury goods.
And if they dumped those surplus vehicles onto the foreign market, they would ruin the export market.
Right. And if they dumped them domestically, they would cause mass unemployment in the auto industry.
So the crushing of new, expensive cars is a deliberate, costly measure to artificially maintain market stability and prevent social collapse caused by automated efficiency.
Exactly. It's a paradox. Engineering efficiency creates so much surplus that the economy has to actively destroy wealth to sustain itself.
And Dan, the engineer who believes in maximizing efficiency, finds this entirely too esoteric.
His engineering mind deals in certainty and physics. Economics deals in unpredictable, manipulated human behavior, which he just can't compute.
Dan realizes he needs a complete professional reorientation. He decides to get a job as a junior draftsman.
And when he seeks out the drafting Dan machine, a powered, semi-automatic drafting machine made by a rival firm, Aladdin, he feels that powerful sense of déjà vu.
It's more than just familiarity, though.
Much more. He recognizes his unique engineering signature, the sequence of actions, the specific mechanical solutions, the way the machine handles complex curves. It's developed precisely the way he would have developed it, given the components of that era.
He realizes that an engineer signs his work just as surely as a painter, and his signature is on a product he never designed.
And this just strengthens his gut feeling that he suffered systematic intellectual theft, possibly across time.
This profound sense of being stolen from, of being a ghost in his own timeline, drives Dan to seek answers.
Yeah, he leverages his job befriending a guy named Chuck Freudenberg, a component engineer at the new, massive version of Hired Girl, Inc.
And it's during a drunken philosophical discussion that Chuck, reluctantly, reveals the classified military secret that changes everything.
The secret is Dr. Hubert Twitchell's time displacement technology. And it wasn't created as a time machine, but as this useless, unstable byproduct of null-grav research based on the Edinburgh field theory at the University of Colorado, Boulder.
Okay, we need to unpack the physics here, which the source describes with a surprising amount of rigor.
It does. Twitchell's device operates based on a fundamental corollary to Newton's third law, action equals reaction, but applied temporally. The physics is summarized as mt equals mt. Mass times temporal potential equals mass times temporal potential.
The system requires two perfectly matched masses discharged at the same temporal potential.
And the resulting action-reaction ensures that if one mass segment goes forward in time, the other segment has to go backward. It's displacement, not travel.
But the technology is catastrophically flawed, which renders it useless for military or commercial use. This is where I have to ask, why would Dan bet his entire life on this?
That's the question, isn't it?
Given the crippling flaws you're about to detail, indeterminacy, no return, and major spatial risk, this sounds less like engineering and more like a high-stakes, purely emotional suicide mission driven by rage.
It was desperation. But it was desperation backed by the recognition that his future knowledge was his only weapon, a temporal advantage no amount of money could buy.
Okay.
He recognized that if he could just manage the flaws, it was the only way to return to the correct temporal potential. But let's look at the flaws that made it useless for everyone else.
Start with the most terrifying flaw, indeterminacy.
You have absolutely no way to orient the equipment to guarantee direction. The displacement is 50-50. You have an equal chance of going forward or backward in time.
So if Dan tried to jump back to 1970, he could just as easily jump forward to 2050.
It's a coin flip, a total gamble.
And even if he hits the right era, there is no return. He can't just press a button to come back to 2001.
Exactly. Once you're displaced, the connection is severed. You have to rely on setting up new identical MT equals MT equipment in the new era, which is impossible. Or relying on external methods like cold sleep, which is the only reason Dan can even consider this, because he knows the cold sleep infrastructure exists in the past and the future.
Then there's the existential horror of spatial risk.
Chuck specifically warns Dan that if he arrives before the displacement lab was built, Twitchell's lab was built around 1980, he could wind up in a tree.
And the consequence of two segments of matter occupying the same space at the same time is catastrophic.
A massive explosion. So Dan has to calculate his temporal jump to land in a safe, known location that existed at both times.
And finally, the crucial hurdle, mass matching. The two segments must be identical.
Not just weight. They must have identical energy and physical properties to maintain that MT equals MT equation. If you want to send one man, you need a matching mass of reaction material, like a pile of rocks or a specific metal isotope.
Twitchell proved this chillingly with two marked $5 coins.
Displaced them by 1 week, and he had to find the older segment of its space-time structure earlier in the week to prove the principle actually worked.
So Dan is knowingly entering a lottery where the odds are terrible and the price of losing is annihilation.
But he decides to use his future knowledge to minimize the risk. His preparation is rigorous. Knowing 2001 currency would be useless or worthless in 1970, he sought the one universally accepted reliable asset.
Gold.
Gold. He bought 10 kilograms of it, specifically isotope 197, which he sourced as dental wire.
Why dental wire?
It's high purity, easily obtainable, and less likely to be immediately flagged as bullion smuggling. And at $86.10 per kilogram, an absurdly low future price, He secured his entire fortune for the past.
And he wove it into a belt to avoid detection.
He essentially monetized the collapse of the fiat currency system that occurred in the Panic of '87.
To trigger the jump, he had to goad the scientist. He couldn't just ask Twitchell to use the machine. It was classified.
So Dan employed psychological engineering. He visited Twitchell for days, pretending to research a biography, calling him an unsung genius.
But when Twitchell became comfortable, Dan struck.
He called him a pompous old faker and claimed his work was relegated to the screwball file at the Department of Defense.
Attacking Twitchell's vanity was the masterstroke. The professor, enraged by the claim of insignificance, pushed the button just to prove Dan wrong.
And Dan's calculation for the temporal distance was exact. 31 years, 3 weeks, 1 day, 7 hours, 13 minutes, and 25 seconds.
He was targeting the precise window of his original betrayal and cold sleep commitment.
He placed his faith in precise engineering, knowing the resulting jump was still a 50% chance of total disaster.
The jump is violent, and Dan lands successfully in May 1970, right onto the grounds of the Denver Sunshine Club.
A nudist colony.
A nudist colony. His 2001 Cerise bell-bottoms are immediately conspicuous, forcing him to invent the amnesia and dizzy spells story to account for his strange clothing and future knowledge.
The immediate priority is capital and credibility. He needs to move that 10 kilograms of gold.
And he manages to establish trust with John Sutton, a lawyer at the club, who becomes his first confidant. Dan spins the tale of finding the gold bullion, the belt in the mountains.
And Sutton, to his credit, agrees to handle the gold sale. This is a crucial element of the narrative. Dan finds an honest man in the past.
Sutton sells the gold for the exact mint value, minus fees, giving Dan immediate legitimate capital. He now has the resources and the blueprints of the future.
With capital secured, Dan embarks on this surgical re-engineering of his life. He rents a loft, and based on his future knowledge, he establishes his new corporation. He knows Los Angeles will be the hub of automation, so John Sutton sets up the legal structure there.
But his order of operations is brilliant. He doesn't start with Protean Pete, the ultimate robot. He starts with drafting Dan.
This is pure engineering pragmatism. Protean Pete, the perfected flexible Frank, was too complex to design manually within the necessary time frame, even with his future knowledge.
He had to invent the tool that would allow him to rapidly design the product.
Exactly. Drafting Dan, the powered semi-automatic drafting machine, had to come first. It accelerated his R&D exponentially, proving that the most important invention is often the machine that helps you invent the next one.
The timeline compresses rapidly, culminating on December 3rd, 1970, the exact date of his original betrayal and cold sleep.
And he has 3 simultaneous critical actions to execute to erase and replace his past.
First, he eliminates the source of the future theft.
He drives to Miles' house, breaks into the garage, and steals his original flexible Frank prototype. He dismantles the chassis entirely, scattering the pieces down a deep arroyo, destroying the physical working model and all the original notes and drawings that Miles had intended to use for patents.
The intellectual property theft is physically aborted.
Gone. Second, he manages the emotional commitment. He arrives at Miles's house in time to hear the sound of the unseen struggle. Pete's chaotic victory over Miles and Bell, the event that originally doomed Dan to cold sleep.
But this time, however, Dan is outside the field of vision and immune to the drug.
He retrieves Pete immediately after the cat's heroic effort, soothes him, and places him in a new travel bag. He has saved Pete from the neglect of the original timeline.
And the third action is the most crucial for his personal future: securing Ricky's welfare. Ricky, the daughter of his former associate, was like a daughter to him.
He tracks her down at Girl Scout camp. Ricky is only 10, but Dan gives her the stock certificate, the shares from Hired Girl, Inc., that he secured in this new timeline.
And he gives her specific, detailed instructions that she must follow 30 years later.
She must take the long sleep and specifically schedule her awakening for May 1st, 2001 at Riverside Sanctuary.
He's using his future knowledge to engineer their reunion, but he still needs to account for his own time jump.
He races to Mutual Assurance, cancels his original tainted cold sleep contract, and immediately signs a new one. He sets his wake-up date 4 days earlier than Ricky's scheduled arrival, April 27, 2001.
This guarantees that he will be awake, oriented, and waiting for her when she follows his instructions.
He has successfully used Twitchell's flawed technology to gain control over the timeline, turning his desperation into destiny.
So Dan wakes up for the second time on April 27, 2001. After 4 days of careful preparation and checking vital statistics, he proceeds to Riverside Sanctuary on May 1st.
And there he meets Dr. Rumsey. The reunion is perfectly orchestrated. Rumsey informs him that Ricky's instructions, based on the notes Dan gave her 30 years earlier, were absolute.
She was only to be awakened when Dan showed up in person.
Ricky wakes, recognizes Dan immediately, and recognizes Pete, who Dan had put to sleep this time, ensuring they both survived the jump. The emotional anchor is complete.
And in that final, sweet confirmation detail, she is wearing Dan's tech class ring, the symbol of his engineering life, on her left thumb.
It signifies her unwavering dedication to his future instruction.
They immediately get married in Yuma, with Pete serving as the proud, philosophical best man, and they retreat to a guest ranch near Tucson.
Dan has successfully used a temporal displacement system that should have killed him to achieve domestic bliss and professional success.
His professional life is thriving. He runs Davis Engineering Company, licensing his superior designs like drafting Dan and Protean Pete's descendants, guaranteeing pure research freedom funded by royalties.
And he insists that he owes everything to the man whose vanity he exploited, Dr. Twitchell, calling him an unsung genius, and he intends to write his biography.
But the journey through time leaves Dan grappling with intense philosophical paradoxes that even marital happiness can't entirely dissipate.
Right. The primary issue is the existence of two versions of himself in the same timeline.
He tried to explain this to Ricky, that while they were honeymooning, the original drugged version of himself was also lying in a stupor in San Fernando Valley, moments away from being shipped off for his first terrible cold sleep.
And Ricky's response is the perfect, simple dismissal of complexity. Why, Danny, how cruel. Besides, guinea pigs don't have tails.
She completely rejected the painful, complex philosophical loops, choosing instead to focus on the reality she inhabited with him.
But the paradox doesn't end there. The most unsettling question for Dan remains the missed newspaper notice of his own second withdrawal.
He was actively checking the vital statistics lists in the newspaper in May 2001, focused on seeing Ricky's name. Yet he failed to see his own name, D.B. Davis, listed for April 28, 2001, only one day after he woke up.
So was it just genuine absent-mindedness, being hyper-focused on engineering and Ricky?
Or does this subtle, unexplainable miss suggest that by interfering with the past, he slipped into a slightly different branching universe?
A universe where the details of his old life were marginally altered, ensuring the past could never entirely align with the present.
And finally, there's the profound philosophical implication of Leonard Vincent.
Vincent was the instructor who made the time jump using Twitchell's flawed technology and never returned. And Dan speculates that Vincent may have been marooned 5 centuries in the past.
And who could a maroon genius be? Dan considers Leonardo da Vinci.
The thought is just chilling. A brilliant mind, 5 centuries ahead of his time, doomed to frustration. He couldn't build his incredible concepts because the former art necessary, the centuries of engineering foundation, the necessary material sciences, the skilled labor pool, was simply too far away.
His genius was rendered impotent by temporal isolation.
Tantalus had it easier.
But Dan, in his own timeline, has found his peace. He is continually working on new gadgets like hydraulic beds for Ricky, who is now pregnant, demonstrating that he never stopped engineering solutions to domestic problems.
He has found his door into summer. His final philosophical conclusion is optimistic and deeply rooted in his professional belief.
The future is better than the past, and the world steadily grows better because the human mind, applying itself to environment, makes it better, with hands, with tools, with horse sense and science and engineering.
And Pete, the philosophical anchor, still checks the doors, convinced that eventually one is bound to be the door into summer.
This deep dive into Dan Davis's source material has given us a rigorous framework for viewing innovation, emphasizing the genius of plug-in modularity and the sophistication of the Thorson memory tubes. We've also seen the cold, hard economic calculus of cold sleep and the inherent instability of financial systems versus the stability of physical assets like gold across temporal gaps.
And Dan's story tells us that true success wasn't achieving revenge. It was about securing his integrity and protecting those he loved.
The ultimate door into summer wasn't a geographical location or a futuristic invention. It was the ability to control his narrative and apply his engineering expertise to build a stable, loving future.
Right.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. Considering the crippling flaws in Twitchell's time displacement system, indeterminacy, no return, and the risk of catastrophic spatial arrival, if you knew you could jump back and alter one key historical mistake that truly hurt you, but you had a 50% chance of landing centuries in the past without money or appropriate technology, would you take the leap?
Is the potential for fixing the past worth the risk of total, technologically marooned failure? Or is Dan Davis's success simply the result of an impossibly lucky coin flip? Something to think about the next time you encounter a persistent problem that only a revolutionary engineering solution could fix.